Hello everyone and welcome to my channel. I'm Patty and I go by Patty Mac Makes Everywhere Online. The view today is of my sewing table, and the project that we're going to be talking about, it's not so much a project that we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about a foundational skill in quilting. And what we're looking at here is the 4-patch quilt block, and it's in various stages of completion. I've got a couple of things here for you to look at, and you might be saying, okay, why should I care about a 4-patch? Well, let me tell you. First of all, they're fun to make. They're really fun, and you can do really cute things with a 4-patch, and it can be as big or as small as you like. It's very flexible in those kinds of terms. I actually made a scrappy quilt or a charm quilt, all with 5-inch squares, and I put that together using these 4-patch blocks. So the whole quilt is made from the 4 patches that I then constructed into rows and then sewed those rows together, and then just little by little put the whole quilt top together. But it all started with the 4-patch. What I like about the 4-patch is you learn so many foundational skills doing it. You're going to learn about accurate cutting. You will learn about piecing, and you will also learn and develop on your machine how to get the perfect 1/4-inch seam. In quilting, the 1/4-inch seam is everything. It's everything that we put together relies on having accurate 1/4-inch seams. And when you sew a lot of 4 patches, it gives you the practice in putting those together. And even though I have started my particular 4 patches here using charm squares, I did cut the neutral fabric. Using a charm pack, I like those because you get something of everything in a collection, and so you can have a really fun, scrappy looking project from using charm packs, and you can do that without having to buy a whole bunch of like small bits or cutting up your fat quarter bundles. That's just me. A lot of people do not like the pre-cuts. I like the pre-cuts, and I think for beginners it is a great place to start. So you get a little practice playing with mixing and matching your patterns and your colors, and you also get a little practice cutting, because you can cut this part, the neutral, from yardage. So let's kind of look at the evolution of the 4-patch here. So up in this corner, this is a finished square, and I'll just tell you right now, the 4 squares that I'm making today as part of this video on the 4-patch tutorial is going to go into a project. You can make your 4 patches, and then when it's all put together, these are all done, I'll show you how to make them into something really fun and that you can enjoy and use. So don't feel like you're just making a bunch of 4 patches with like no end goal. There is a project coming. But anyway, okay, here is the finished. And what I like to do is I like to have the squares be a little bigger than what I'm going to need, and then trim down to what I want for my project. That way it's super accurate. This is an untrimmed 4-patch. So here you have the trimmed and the untrimmed. And you know, it is a little bit off, but when I trim it down, it's perfect. So always have your pieces a little bit larger so that you can cut them down. The main thing I want you to see is that the intersection here is perfect. And so when we trim this one down to match this one, all of these little corners are going to line up. And that's the thing with the 4-patch, it gives you the practice getting this little point right. You get these little joins absolutely perfect, and so on around. So here's what we're going for in the end. Here is a work in progress sewn together, and then these are 2 different 4 patches laid out. So what I suggest is, especially if you're doing a smaller project like the one we have coming up, lay all of your pieces out, and then you can kind of decide, do you like the arrangement? And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to switch these two. And I'm going to put the bird here and see how I like that. And I do think I like that. And then as you put these together, each block is going to lose a 1/2 inch by the time it's all sewn together, because you've got 1/4 inch seams all the way around. So here's a 1/4 inch seam, and then when these go together, it's another 1/4 inch seam. And then on this side, when it sews, it'll be another 1/4 inch seam. So you wind up losing a 1/2 inch all the way around. So even though this piece looks really big, by the time you trim it to your size and then sew it into the finished project, it's a lot smaller than you think it's going to be. So you can see how large this looks to the finished block. And then once it's actually sewn into its little mini quilt top, it'll be even smaller. So don't get hung up or flipped out over how big the things look when you first lay them out. So to begin, what we're going to do is we're going to sew these in pairs, and we will place right sides together. And because these are small pieces, I don't pin the initial pairs together. I'm just really careful about lining up the edges and carefully running the fabric through the machine to maintain that accurate 1/4 inch seam. And we are going to put these together doing something called chain piecing, which is we have all of our little pairs ready to go, and we are going to run them through the machine one after the other. And chain piecing is really awesome because you can sew a little bit faster and you don't use quite as much thread. So you're not having to snip these really long thread tails every time you sew a pair together. So we'll get all of our pairs sewn. To assemble the 4 patch, we need 2 of the pairs. I want you to see the 4 patch blocks coming off the sewing machine. And you can see how they're all connected. It's almost like a little garland. And that's what you get when you chain piece. So what I'm going to do is snip them apart. You can see I'm doing that here. And notice how you don't have all those long thread tails. So you're saving on thread when you do the chain piece, and it's a lot faster. Here what I'm going to do is I'm going to just finger press, and you want your seam to go to the dark side. When you 4 patch, what you really want is you want a light and a dark, and that really gives you the contrast that you're looking for. And always finger press to the dark side, and then we'll take it over to the ironing board and give it a good press with the iron. Because you have pressed your seams to one side and the other, what you will do is nest the seams. And when you pin, a way to make sure that you are getting your seams to line up is to start the pin on the top, go through the stitch line, and make sure that you are also going through the stitch line on the bottom. And get everything perfectly squared up, and when you bring the pin back on the other side, same thing. Make sure that the pin is actually piercing that mid stitch line where you sewed the pairs together. That way you know that you have that middle seam meeting up and that you'll have that nice little point, because you want that point in your 4 patch. That's really important to get. And because we really want this to be accurate, I will do 1 pin in each block just to keep them together. And we just have these 2 blocks to sew. I'll go ahead and chain piece those. turn it over, and you're going to just what we call spin the seam, and you're just going to like pop that seam open. And the only way that you can get the hang of this is to physically do it. So you've got to just do it. Just spin the seam, and when you have it right, it will look like a little four patch on the inside. And then what you do is gently press into place. You don't want to stretch the stuff. You want to be really careful when you're quilting that you don't stretch. So it is recommended that you turn off the steam, you just use the hot iron and you press, don't stretch. So get everything pressed nice and flat. You could do a little spray starch at this point to really keep it nice and crisp. If you have trouble getting the seam to spin like it's supposed to, don't worry about that. Just press that middle seam open. Sometimes they don't want to do it. Sometimes they do. Don't lose your mind over it. Just the goal is to just get the four patch as flat as possible, and you will have the most bulk in that center seam. Spin if you can. If you can't, just press open all the way across. You just want to reduce the bulk. So now that we have the four patch sewn together and pressed out and it's nice and flat, now we're going to trim it to size. And the size that you trim it to is really going to depend on your whatever pattern you're following. Your pattern instructions will tell you what size. For my quilt that I made, I cut everything down to 9-inch squares or 9-inch blocks. So I took about a half an inch off or a quarter inch on each side, each of the four sides. So when I was done, I had a nice finished block that was 9 inches. For the next project we're doing, we're going to cut it all the way down to 8.5. So you're losing a little bit, but for a first project, I would rather see you trim a little bit extra, start with a bigger block, trim a little extra, and have that wiggle room to get it just right. I think that's important. So, okay, that's how we put the block together. I hope that explains it well to you. If you have questions, pop them below. This is how I put them together. And in the next video, we're going to take our series of four patches and we're going to sew them into a project. So make sure you're subscribed, make sure you have the notifications on, and yeah, I'll catch you in the next video. Thanks so much.